This is History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians Thornton Kennedy and James Ottley.
Good afternoon, James. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. How about yourself?
I'm fine. We've got our episode on the Masters here. I've got my green Masters cup and a Miller Lite, which is my favorite beverage anytime I'm lucky enough to go walk the golf course.
And I've got my Masters hat on, so no visor.
You absolutely do. I think we're both in agreement that Augusta National is one of those iconic places. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of property imaginable.
Sacred ground.
Sacred ground. It comes across really well on television. And I think that's going to be a big part of the conversation as we talk about the history of the Masters is how Cliff Roberts and Bobby Jones created this tournament, how they selected Augusta National, and how it grew over the years to become one of the four majors.
Absolutely. Looking forward to getting into it.
And I think the conversation should probably start either with Cliff Roberts or with Bobby Jones. And I think because Bobby Jones is the more famous of the two, we'd start with Bobby Jones.
That makes sense. Makes sense to me.
All right, trivia question for you. In what house?
The Grant Mansion.
The Grant Mansion in Grant Park. Bobby Jones was born in 1902 on St. Patrick's Day in one of the most historic houses in Atlanta. And apparently he was kind of a sickly child.
And also a sickly adult.
Was he? Oh, that's right. Yeah. So he had a tough time in his early years, but he was a precocious kid. He liked to run around. His father, I thought this was very interesting. His dad graduated from the University of Georgia and signed a contract to play baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Or the forerunner of the Brooklyn Dodgers.
And his father, the original Robert Tyre Jones Sr.
Well, I got to correct you on that.
What's that?
His father was actually Robert Permitas.
Oh, I'm sorry. The grandfather. What I'm saying is that Permitas Jones' his father, Robert Tyre Jones, the original, forbade his son from playing professional baseball. Did not think it was an appropriate endeavor.
Said, you're not going to be a playboy, you're going to be a lawyer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he followed his father's instructions.
Yeah, so Colonel Jones, Bobby Jones' dad, was an attorney, and he moved the family in a rental house first out to East Lake, which was the Atlanta Athletic Club's East Lake Golf Course. And that's where young Bobby Jones was first introduced to the game of golf. At the time, he preferred baseball. He liked to kind of mess around with the neighborhood kids.
Skill from his father, you know.
Clearly, I mean, he was influenced. I think a gentleman, one of his dad's friends, gave him his first golf club and cut it down for him. He called it a cleek.
Huh.
Do you know what
I do not. I guess I do now.
What a cleek is? A cleek is like all those clubs. All those clubs were like butter knives. I mean, there was not a whole lot of technology in a golf club in 1905, 1906. Right. So it was literally like a one iron. Okay. And Jones talks about it a little bit in his book, Down the Fairway, about how he and his friends would just come up and just whack the ball. There was no skill involved. It was simply hitting the ball as hard as you could with the club.
Aim and hit.
Aim and hit. His family moves back into sort of Atlanta proper, but he's already had a little sort of encounter with golf. They moved back to East Lake when he's a little bit older, I think when he's around 5 years old. And they buy a house on the 13th hole. So they actually live on the East Lake golf course.
How convenient, right?
And that's when his mom and dad start playing golf regularly. And they become a part of that golfing community.
Right.
And this is the origin story of Bobby Jones is that it was the pro, Stuart Maiden. I'm going to hack this. I apologize. From Cartousi, Scotland.
I'll go with it.
Go with it.
Better.
Just a thick Scottish accent. You couldn't understand anything that he said because it was such a thick Scottish accent. And young Bobby Jones, I mean like 5-year-old Bobby Jones, would follow Stuart Maiden around the golf course. No club in hand, didn't do anything, just watched him.
Served him well.
And then after the day, he would go back to the 13th hole and take his little cleek and imitate his golf swing over and over and over again. And he became kind of a mimic. He could mimic anyone's golf swing. And his dad would do this like a parlor trick. So everybody would gather at the Jones house on Sunday for Sunday lunch, they called it, which was more like a rolling supper type of thing. Right. They called it lunch at the time. And Colonel Jones would get Bobby to go out there and make fun of all of his friends, mocking their golf swings. So he had this from a very early age, a certain skill, a certain I'd even call him a prodigy.
Yeah, there you go. Very cool. And I think you also mentioned that, or we're going to mention maybe that not only did the RT Jones, the grandfather, he didn't watch any of his son's baseball games.
Yeah.
I think he also, it took a while for him to start watching Bobby play golf. Did you know that as well?
He refused to acknowledge that he watched Bobby Jones play golf.
And I think he was just, the guy was such a hardworking, he was very successful, this is the grandfather.
Right.
Very successful guy. Owned a lot of acreage in Canton. Owned a cotton gin, had the Jones Mercantile Company. And one year, it was reported that he was making $1.5 million a year. And back then, it was about $100 million. And so, you know, he was definitely a
successful
businessman, and he didn't want his kids going off and what he thought screwing around with sports. You know, he wanted them both to be, or he wanted his son to be a lawyer.
What's really interesting about that is, so Bobby Jones wins his first quote unquote, if you will, when he's 6 years old. One of the East Lake's moms organized the kids to go around the course and play. His buddy Frank Metter kept the score and announced that Bobby Jones had won the trophy. And so he gets this little silver cup and he goes to sleep with it. And he said it was his most prized trophy all of his life. When he shoots 80 at East Lake, and he's a kid, he runs to his dad, who's also playing on the golf course. And it's almost like trepidation. He wants to show his dad this scorecard because it was the first time he had shot that low. And he shows his dad the scorecard, and his dad gives him a hug.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's the opposite of what
That's exactly right.
Robert Prometheus Jones experienced with his father. He really supported his son, and he said, I couldn't tell, but I might have seen a little bit of wetness in my father's eyes.
That's awesome. I wonder if he was a more sympathetic man. I mean, because he had gone through that. Also, another kind of interesting thing, Bobby had an older brother, William, who only lived 3 months.
And I did not know that.
The death of that child maybe made his father maybe more sympathetic and loving towards Bobby than he might have otherwise been.
That's so interesting. Did not know that. So Bobby goes on to win tournaments. He wins the...
Before we get there, though, you talked about his degree. Did you know that he had a degree from Harvard?
Yes.
Okay. And you might have covered
in English literature. No, because we're not there yet. He wins... He wins that first Atlanta Athletic Club Junior Championship when he's 9 years old.
Wow.
I know, right? And then in 1916, he wins the inaugural Georgia Amateur Championship. And when he wins at 14 years old, James, he wins this amateur championship for the state of Georgia. He is invited to play in the U.S. Amateur Tournament in Marion, Pennsylvania. At 14 years old. You know what I was doing when I was 14?
Not that. We won't say. You probably don't want to disclose that.
It is crazy. Qualifies for the U.S. Open when he's 18 years old. He was paired with the legendary Harry Vardon, who he had watched play against his hero Stuart Maiden at East Lake. Like, he's suddenly playing golf at the age of 18 with these guys that were the icons. And he can remember, he's such a prodigy. He remembers strokes. He remembers holes that they played. He can recount stroke for stroke what this guy did on East Lake Golf Course. He just saw golf in a very interesting, personal way.
Very cool. Very cool. You know, at this point, are we maybe ready to move on to Alister MacKenzie? Or are you
not yet. Not yet. A little bit more material. He wins the U.S. Open in 1923 at Inwood Country Club in New York. First player to win the double, both the U.S. and British Open championships in the same year, 1926. And he goes on, obviously, to win the Grand Slam, which at the time was the British Amateur, the U.S. Amateur, the British Open, and the U.S. Open. And still a young man. Now, to your point, I believe this is around the time, it might have been 1927, that he meets Alister MacKenzie.
And you know the backstory on that?
No, I know that he approached him while he was playing at St. Andrews and gave him a book or something.
Kind of a variation of that, at least according to my research.
Do not fact check me no.
Well, according to my research, Jones got to know Dr. MacKenzie in 1929 in California. Jones had just lost in a stunning upset at the first round of the U.S. Amateur Tournament at Pebble Beach, and he had some free time on his hands. He had this kind of funny. He had his lodging reserved for the week, and so he figured, well, I paid for it, or at least reserved it, so I'll stick around and play some other courses in the area. he played a course, or one of the courses he played was down the road,
Cypress Point,
which MacKenzie had designed. And as luck would turn out, MacKenzie was actually in California, in that area at the time. He was working on another golf course. He's 59 years old, and he was also romancing a local widow.
Ah, there you go. There's always a woman.
That's right, as we've established. He interrupted his duties designing this golf course and romancing this widow to spend some time with Jones, and they played some golf together. And they discussed, what should go into a great golf course and what should be left out. And you're right, he did send him his book, A Golf Architecture, which he wrote in 1920. And the inscription on the front page was I thought, very touching. He said, to the world's finest sportsman and greatest golfer, with the author's compliments, A.D. 1927. Now, what's interesting with that book, the subtitle is Economy and Golf Course Construction and Green Keeping. And when they designed Augusta National, or when Bobby was thinking about, trying to get that done, it was right in the middle of a raging depression. It was the fact that, he had a concentration and had the know-how on how to build a golf course on the cheap. That really appealed to Bobby.
That's really interesting.
They also agreed that the old course at St. Andrews was absolutely sacred ground and the the finest course ever built.
And another interesting component, an interesting wrinkle to MacKenzie, which you really appreciate. He was an expert in camouflage and designed camouflage during World War I.
No kidding.
And that was some of his influence for what a golf course looks like. If you look at a golf course from an aerial view, some of his sand traps have those kind of shapes to them, and the greens have those shapes. He was a camoufleur. Which is a camouflage designer.
Another thing that apparently impacted or influenced his golf course design was the fact that up until later in life, he was a really bad golfer.
Right.
And so, like most bad golfers, including myself, he didn't like, a lot of roughs or small greens or a lot of, hazards, and a lot of water hazards and things like that. And so, and long grass, he hated all of that, narrow fairways. And so he left those out of courses that he designed. Another thing that's kind of interesting about him, he was, he was, half Scottish. He actually grew up in Leeds in Yorkshire.
Right.
And he, his mother was English, and he was actually born Alexander, and then I guess changed his name later on to Alister.
That's interesting.
To be more authentic.
You're going to build one quote on top of your note about Bobby Jones and Alister MacKenzie and their need to design courses that were to be enjoyed by high handicappers, which I'm sure you have no familiarity with.
No.
When players like Jack Nicklaus were just tearing up Augusta National, a fan wrote to Cliff Roberts and complained about how difficult the course was and the fact that there was no long grass and there was very little rough. And Cliff Roberts dutifully sent the note on to Bobby Jones, who responded. He wrote this guy a letter back and said, "Our golf course is designed for the enjoyment of our members who do not delight in playing all day from sand and long grass. For this reason, we expect to keep the course about as it is, meaning in general design and conception, regardless of what long hitters may do." He wanted people to enjoy playing golf, and not to stack and unstack, but my grandfather was a horrendous golfer, and he was a member of Augusta National, and Paul enjoyed playing that course.
And he could play it.
He could.
Well, one of the Cliff actually said,
Who is Cliff?
Well, let's talk about Cliff.
Cliff Roberts.
Let's talk about Cliff Roberts. Well, Cliff Roberts, he was actually, a lot of people think of him as this, famous New York financier, stockbroker, that kind of thing. That's not where he originally made his money. A lot of people think that that
he made his money selling suits.
Well, he did sell suits, but after that, when he was young, the family moved to Texas, and he saw the oil wealth that was created there.
Sure.
And so when he came back from the war, he actually, and I want to mention or go back just a minute, he served in World War I as an ambulance driver, interestingly enough, kind of like Hemingway. That's right. And so when he trained, or was doing his training for that, he was stationed at Fort Hancock in Augusta. And that may be, we're going to get later on into how Augusta was chosen, but that might have been his first exposure to that area, to that city. But he did sell suits. His mother died. Actually, she shot herself.
Right.
And just
Well, it's rumored that both his parents committed suicide because his father stepped in front of a train.
was that his father or his grandfather?
His father.
Okay, all right. So, and another kind of interesting fact about his mother, her maiden name, she was Rebecca Scott Keyes, and she was a cousin of Francis Scott Keyes.
Wow.
Who composed the Star Spangled
Sure.
Banner. But you're exactly right. He sold suits. When his mother died, he became an overachiever at that time.
Sure.
And when he drove around, he actually bought a Model T Ford. He drove around Texas selling so many suits that his employer couldn't keep up. His employer said, "Hey, take a break." So over the summers of his 20th and first years, he went to his grandfather's house. They had a vineyard in California. And he spent the summers there, taking time off, sitting in his grandfather's library, reading biographies of great men. And so,
Wow.
Did that influence him in terms of, he reached out to and obviously partnered with a number of great men to accomplish everything that he did.
And his father was a serial entrepreneur. His dad would latch on to an idea. He would grow it to where it was somewhat successful and then sort of lose interest.
Is that
And
right?
so the family, why the family moved so much and bounced around is that the father just could not stay focused. He
Right.
would have success. He would lose all the money. They would make their money back. And so Cliff Roberts grew up all over the place, but he always had a job. Because of his mother's mental health issues, he was always helping around the house. He just seemed to be a very industrious person.
One way he did not help around the house was when he went back in as a young boy to get his gloves when they were on the way to church, knocked over the kerosene lamp.
It burned the house down.
The house burned down. So they had to move into a smaller house nearby. I don't know if it was, again, they were in Texas at this point, and he saw his wealthy neighbors who had made money off of oil. I guess I didn't cover that, and I meant to. So when he came back from the war, rather than selling suits, he actually got into the oil business in a sense. He didn't go out and wildcat, but he went to different farmers and bought the mineral rights for these leases for the oil underneath their land. And in 1923, he was able to package a number of these leases and really scored big. He sold them for $50,000.
That's
a lot of
awesome.
money. And at that point, that's when he moved to New York City and put his money to work. He actually bought into a brokerage firm, the Reynolds Company,
Sure.
which later became Dean Witter Reynolds. And that interest at his death was where he owned 1/6 of that company. And at his death, that was worth $25 million. He was
Wow.
worth, I believe, $96 million at his death. He didn't have any kids. He believed that overpopulation was going to ruin the world and gave most of his money to Planned Parenthood.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Who knew?
In fact, and I don't want to steal your thunder here, but in fact, he was really against, too much, as I said, overpopulation. And there's a story that there was a guy that was invited to be a member of Augusta National, and everybody liked him, and the guy had 5 kids. And Cliff blackballed him and said, anybody stupid enough to have 5 kids is not smart enough to be a member of Augusta National. At least that's how the story goes.
That is fantastic. I mean, we didn't talk about this at the outset, but I think it is worth saying, and we'll get into this later. Bobby Jones's celebrity certainly made the Augusta National stand out, but it was really Cliff Roberts and his work ethic, his ingenuity, his vision. People say that Bobby Jones and Cliff Roberts were like yin and yang, that Bobby Jones was this genial Southern gentleman and could charm people, and Cliff was this iron-fisted tyrant. But that's not the case. They were both very powerful men, both very powerful. And Cliff Roberts had a very clear vision of what the Masters and what Augusta National could be, and he executed on it.
Detail.
Every single detail, down to, we'll get into this, but it's insane how involved and how protective he was over Augusta National. And whereas Bobby Jones was more interested in the camaraderie, the friendships, the golf, for him, it was an opportunity to put into practice some of the things he had learned in golf course design and spend a stress-free day with his friends playing a round of golf.
That's exactly privately.
Privately, right.
I'll go back to your point on having it be stress-free. He was described as having the face of an angel, but the temper of a timber wolf. In my research, it said that he really is this stress that he felt because he was, he got, really apparently, very tough. And he really enjoyed. One of the reasons he retired, according to this book, was he just wanted golf to be fun. He wanted to play, like you said, with his friends and enjoy it, and not,
Well, there's this legendary story about he is so revered and loved in England and in Scotland, and especially on the old course. But as a young man, he got so frustrated, he actually picked up a ball mid-tournament and quit.
Is that right?
And he was vilified in the press. They absolutely hated him. But he had that kind of short fuse to him that if it wasn't going well, he just lost it. And it's amazing to me that he ends up turning that entire crowd around. And it was a big part of his maturing. He learned to control his temper and to sort of play within himself and not go crazy. But you're right. After he wins the Grand Slam, he just decided, and he said it many times, championship golf was really difficult. And he wanted to step away from championship golf. And I think we have said this. If we haven't, it bears repeating. He was an amateur. He was not a professional. He became a professional after he retired.
Is that right?
So that he could make some money. As a golf pro, he would put these videos together. And in order to shoot
films at that time,
in order to do yes, thank you.
Right.
In order to do the films, he had to be a registered pro.
I read that too. That's a good point. Let me circle back a little bit to Cliff and his life once he, after he left Texas and
goes to New York.
Right. So that's a really important, obviously, time in his life because he's meeting a lot of important and influential people there.
Right.
In addition to making a lot of money. So Cliff joins the Deepdale Golf Club on Long Island. He takes golf vacations with his friends, the other members there, and they would occasionally go to Augusta to play golf, which maybe was at his suggestion because he was familiar with it. And so they stayed at a Bridge Buddies place called the Bonnier Vanderbilt,
yes,
we'll probably talk about. And they played golf course, Forest Hills and Augusta Country Club. And it was actually Walt Marshall who owned the Bonnier Vanderbilt.
The hotel.
And it was Walt that introduced Cliff to Jones in New York in 1925.
So that's such a vague thing, and most of the research I read was they met in the 1920s in New York.
Well, it was, my research, says that it was through him and the relationship from his Bridge Club buddy.
And I think Jones's wife's family was from Augusta as well.
Is that right?
Yeah. So there was an additional connection. But I think that's a really interesting point, and that is this is the 1920s. Great Gatsby. This is the roaring 20s.
Right.
And on the horizon is the collapse of the U.S. economy. He's in New York on Wall Street. And this sort of segues beautifully into chapter 2, which is that when Bobby Jones retires, Cliff Roberts joins up with him, and they set out to establish this golf club, this country club, in the depths of the Great Recession, which just sounds positively insane.
And I think that Cliff Roberts' ability to raise that kind of money, and I've got somewhere the figures there, was really something that impressed Bobby Jones.
But he had a really hard time raising that money. But we'll get to that in just a second. For now, History for Cocktail Parties.
Thank you for listening.
Part 2 coming up.